The July sun beat down merciless and unforgiving across the Oklahoma Territory in 1883, and Isaac Kellerman had ridden 3 days straight through dust and desperation when he spotted something so peculiar it made him pull his mare to a halt and squint against the glare. Between 2 towering saguaro cactuses, strips of what looked like venison hung drying on a makeshift line of rope, and crouched beside them was a woman in a faded calico dress, her dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat as she carefully arranged more meat on the improvised rack. Isaac dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the parched earth with a soft thud that made the woman's head snap up. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, wide with alarm, and her hand moved instinctively toward something hidden in the folds of her skirt. "Easy there," Isaac said, raising both hands to show he meant no harm. "Did not mean to startle you, madam, just wondering if you might be in need of some assistance." The woman straightened, and Isaac could see the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, but her hands were work-worn and her dress had been mended so many times it was hard to tell what the original fabric had looked like. "I am managing just fine, thank you," she said, but her voice wavered slightly, betraying the lie. Isaac glanced around at the desolate landscape. There was not a building in sight, just endless scrubland dotted with cactus and the occasional stunted mesquite tree. "Forgive me for being forward, madam, but this does not look like managing. Where is your home?" The woman's jaw tightened, and for a moment Isaac thought she might tell him to mind his own business and ride on. Instead, her shoulders sagged slightly and she gestured toward a depression in the earth about 50 yards away. "There, what is left of it?" Isaac led his horse closer, and his heart sank when he saw what she meant. What had once been a sod house had collapsed in on itself, likely from the heavy rains that had pounded the territory 2 weeks back. The walls had given way and the roof had caved in completely, leaving nothing but a pile of mud bricks and scattered belongings half buried in the rubble. "Lord have mercy," Isaac breathed. "How long have you been out here like this?" "5 days," the woman admitted. "The house fell during the storm. I managed to pull out what I could, but there was no saving it." She turned back to the meat hanging between the cactuses. "I shot a deer yesterday, could not let the meat spoil, and I had no porch to hang it on, so I made do with what I had." Isaac had seen plenty of hardship in his 26 years, had weathered his own share of misfortune, but something about this woman's quiet determination in the face of such dire circumstances struck him deeply. "What is your name, madam?" "Beatrice Anderson," she replied. "And before you ask, there is no husband. He died of fever last winter, and I have been trying to work this claim alone ever since." "Isaac Kellerman," he introduced himself, tipping his hat. "And I cannot in good conscience ride away and leave you here like this. You got any family nearby?" "Anyone who could take you in." Beatrice's laugh was bitter. "My family is back in Missouri, and they made it clear when I married Thomas that I was on my own. They did not approve of him wanting to homestead out west. As for his family, they are all dead or scattered to the winds." Isaac looked from the ruined sod house to the woman standing proud despite her circumstances, and he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "I am headed to Oklahoma City. Got a job waiting for me at her ranch about 10 miles outside of town. The foreman is an old friend, and he mentioned they could use someone to help with cooking and such for the hands. Pay is not much, but it comes with room and board. You could ride with me, get yourself settled somewhere proper instead of trying to survive out here with nothing but 2 cactuses and a prayer." Beatrice studied him with those storm-gray eyes, weighing and measuring. "I do not know you from Adam, Mr. Kellerman." "How do I know this is not some scheme?" "You do not," Isaac said honestly. But I give you my word as a Christian man that I mean you no harm. You can ride your own horse if you have one. Keep your distance from me the whole way if it makes you feel safer. But madam, you cannot stay out here. The next storm will wash away what little you have left, and then what will you do? The fight seemed to drain out of Beatrice all at once. I do not have a horse. Thomas sold ours last fall to buy seed for planting. I have been walking to the creek 3 miles south for water. Isaac felt anger rise in his chest at the thought of this woman walking 6 miles a day in this heat just to survive, but he kept his voice gentle. Then you will ride with me. We will take the meat you have already dried, pack up whatever you can salvage from your belongings, and we will head out at first light tomorrow. That will give you time to rest and prepare. I have no money to pay you for your kindness, Beatrice said quietly. Did not ask for any, Isaac replied. Sometimes folks just need to help each other. That is all there is to it. They worked together as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Isaac helped Beatrice take down the strips of dried venison and wrap them carefully in a piece of oilcloth she had salvaged. Together they picked through the ruins of the sodhouse, pulling out a battered trunk of clothes, a cast iron skillet, a Bible with water-damaged pages, and a wedding photograph in a cracked frame. Beatrice held the photograph for a long moment, her thumb tracing the face of the young man standing stiffly beside her younger self. Thomas was a good man, she said softly. He just had bad luck. The crops failed 2 years running and then the fever took him. I tried to make it work after he passed, but the land here is too hard for one person alone. It is hard for 2 people, Isaac said. You did more than anyone could expect. That night they made camp near the collapsed sod house. Isaac insisted Beatrice take his bedroll while he made do with his saddle blanket, and he kept the fire burning bright to ward off any predators. They ate some of the dried venison along with hardtack from Isaac's saddlebags, and as the stars wheeled overhead, they talked. Isaac learned that Beatrice had grown up the youngest of 5 children, in a strict household where her father ruled with an iron fist. She had met Thomas Anderson when he came through her town selling farm equipment, and his dreams of building a life in the West had seemed like a fairy tale compared to the suffocating propriety of her parents' home. They had married within 3 months and headed to Oklahoma Territory with little more than hope and determination. I do not regret marrying him, Beatrice said, staring into the flames. But I would be lying if I said I was not scared now. I am 23 years old and I have nothing to show for the last 3 years except calluses and grief. You have yourself, Isaac pointed out. You survived. That counts for something. Beatrice glanced at him across the fire. What about you, Mr. Kellerman? What brings you to Oklahoma Territory? Isaac poked at the fire with a stick, watching the embers dance. My family had a ranch in Texas, near San Antonio. My father died when I was 15, and I helped my mother and sisters run the place for 9 years. Last year, my oldest sister married a man with his own land, and they insisted my mother come live with them. My other sister married as well and moved to Austin. They wanted me to sell the ranch and divide the money between us all, but I could not bear to let it go. Spent a year trying to work it alone until I finally admitted I was being a fool. Sold it last month and decided to head north, find work, maybe save up enough to buy a smaller place of my own someday. So we are both starting over, Beatrice said. Seems that way, Isaac agreed. They set out at dawn, Beatrice riding behind Isaac on his sturdy mare. It was not ideal, but the horse was strong enough to carry them both, and Isaac kept the pace easy to spare the animal in the heat. Beatrice sat straight-backed behind him, her hands resting lightly on his waist, maintaining a careful propriety even in their necessary closeness. The first day of travel passed in relative silence, broken only by occasional comments about landmarks or the need to stop and water the horse. But as they made camp that evening beside a narrow creek, the conversation began to flow more naturally. "Tell me about this ranch where you will be working," Beatrice said as she filled their canteens. "The Bar K Ranch," Isaac said, "belongs to a man named Samuel Porter. I met his foreman, Dutch Morrison, when I was passing through Wichita Falls last year. We played cards one evening and got to talking. He mentioned they were always looking for good hands, and when I wrote to him last month saying I was selling my place, he wrote back with an offer. $2 a day plus room and board, help with the cattle and horses. And you think they might have worked for me as well?" Beatrice asked. "Dutch mentioned in his letter that their cook quit last spring and they have been making do with whoever draws the short straw each week. A woman with proper cooking skills would be a blessing. Cannot promise anything for certain, but I will speak to him on your behalf." Beatrice nodded slowly. "I can cook. My mother insisted all her daughters learn properly, even if she did not approve of much else I did. I can sew as well, do laundry, tend a garden. I'm not afraid of hard work." "I noticed that much already," Isaac said with a slight smile. Something flickered in Beatrice's expression, a warmth that had been absent before. "Thank you, Mr. Kellerman, for not leaving me out there. For giving me a chance at something better." "Isaac," he corrected gently. "We have been riding together for a day and sleeping 20 feet apart. I think we can dispense with the formalities." "Isaac, then," Beatrice said, and the corner of her mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "And you should call me Beatrice, or Bea if you prefer. My sisters always called me Bea." The second day brought harder travel as they crossed rougher terrain, following a trail that wound through rocky hills and steep-sided arroyos. The heat continued relentless, and by midday, both of them were drenched in sweat. When they stopped to rest the horse and themselves in the meager shade of an overhang, Isaac noticed Beatrice swaying on her feet. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" he asked, concern sharpening his voice. "I ate this morning," Beatrice protested weakly. "I mean before that." "Before I found you." Beatrice was quiet for a moment. "A few days. I had some flour left, made a little bread, and I ate some of the deer, of course." Isaac cursed under his breath and dug through his saddlebags, pulling out jerky and a small sack of dried apples. "You need to eat more than you have been. You are going to collapse if you keep on like this." "I am fine," Beatrice insisted, but she took the food he offered and ate it without further protest. They rested for 2 hours in the shade, waiting for the worst of the afternoon heat to pass. Isaac found himself watching Beatrice as she dozed lightly against the rock wall, her face relaxed in sleep. She was pretty in a worn sort of way, all sharp angles and hidden strength. Something about her called to a part of him he had thought died when he sold his family's ranch, the part that wanted to build something lasting, to put down roots and make a life that mattered. He pushed the thought away. She was a widow barely 5 months out from her husband's death, and he was a drifter with nothing to his name but a horse and the clothes on his back. Whatever he might be feeling was nothing more than the natural attraction of a lonely man toward a handsome woman in need. It would pass. But when Beatrice woke and met his eyes, something in her gaze made him wonder if she might be fighting similar thoughts. They reached Oklahoma City on the evening of the 3rd day. The town sprawled across the prairie, a chaotic collection of wooden buildings and canvas tents, saloons and general stores, churches and boarding houses all jumbled together. The streets were thick with people, cowboys and gamblers and merchants and families all seeking their fortune in the territory. "It is bigger than I expected," Beatrice breathed, staring wide-eyed at the bustling streets. Oklahoma City has been growing fast since the land run 4 years ago, Isaac explained. They say it will be a proper city someday, might even become the capital if the territory ever becomes a state. They rode through town slowly, Isaac navigating by the directions Dutch had sent him. The Bar K Ranch was north of the city, and they reached it just as the last light was fading from the sky. The ranch was substantial, with a large main house, a bunkhouse for the hands, a barn, corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the pastures beyond, and the sound of men's voices drifted from the bunkhouse. A tall man with graying hair and a weathered face emerged from the barn as they rode up. His eyes took in Isaac and Beatrice with sharp assessment. "You would be Kellerman, I reckon." "Yes, sir." "Isaac Kellerman, and you must be Dutch Morrison." Dutch nodded and then looked at Beatrice. "And who might this young lady be?" "Beatrice Anderson," Isaac said. "I came across her out on the prairie. Her sodhouse collapsed in the storms, and she has been trying to survive on her own since her husband passed last winter. I told her you might have work for a cook." Dutch's expression softened slightly. "That is a hard story, Mrs. Anderson. I am sorry for your loss." He scratched his jaw thoughtfully. "We do need a cook, that is for certain. The boys have been complaining something fierce about the meals lately. Can you cook for 20 men 3 times a day?" "Yes, sir," Beatrice said firmly. "I can cook and clean and do whatever else needs doing." "The pay is $1 a day plus room and board," Dutch said. "You would have a room in the back of the main house, take your meals in the kitchen. Sunday afternoons off. We expect breakfast at 5 in the morning, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. You would need to keep the kitchen and dining area clean, do the shopping for supplies in town once a week with one of the hands to drive you." "Does that sound acceptable?" "More than acceptable," Beatrice said, and the relief in her voice was palpable. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison." "I will not disappoint you. See that you do not," Dutch said, but his tone was not unkind. "Come on, I will show you both where you will be staying. Kellerman, you will be in the bunkhouse with the other hands. Mrs. Anderson, your room is this way." The main house belonged to Samuel Porter and his wife, but they were currently in Kansas City visiting family and would not return for another 2 weeks. Dutch showed Beatrice to a small but clean room off the kitchen, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a wardrobe. It was sparse but infinitely better than sleeping under the stars beside a collapsed sodhouse. "There is water in the pump out back," Dutch explained. "Privy is behind the barn. You will find basic supplies in the kitchen, and tomorrow I will go over the pantry with you and the budget for shopping. Breakfast is at 5, so I expect you up by 4 to get started." "I will be ready," Beatrice promised. Dutch turned to Isaac. "Come on, Kellerman. Let me show you the bunkhouse and introduce you to the boys. You will start work tomorrow morning as well. Hope you know your way around cattle and horses." "I do," Isaac assured him. As they walked toward the bunkhouse, Isaac glanced back at the main house. Through the window he could see Beatrice standing in her new room, her hand pressed against the glass. She looked small and lost, and he felt a pang of something that might have been regret at leaving her. The bunkhouse was loud and rough, filled with the smell of tobacco smoke and unwashed men. Dutch introduced Isaac to the crew, a collection of hard-bitten cowboys ranging in age from 18 to past 50. They were friendly enough in the way of men who worked together, offering handshakes and gruff welcomes. Isaac claimed an empty bunk near the back and stowed his few belongings. As he lay down that night, listening to the snores and rustlings of the other men, he found himself thinking about Beatrice settling into her room in the big house. He wondered if she felt as strange and unmoored as he did, starting over in a place where nobody knew them and the future was uncertain. The next morning arrived brutally early. Isaac dragged himself from his bunk at 4:30 and joined the stream of men heading toward the main house for breakfast. The dining room was set with long tables and benches, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. Beatrice emerged from the kitchen carrying a massive platter of eggs, her hair pulled back in a neat bun and her face flushed from the heat of the stove. She had changed into a different dress, still worn but cleaner, and there was a determined set to her jaw. She served the food efficiently, making sure every man got a generous portion, and the cowboys dug in with enthusiastic appreciation. "This is a damned sight better than what we have been eating," one of the younger hands declared through a mouthful of biscuit. "No offense to you, Charlie, but your biscuits could be used for ammunition." The man named Charlie, a grizzled cowboy with a gray mustache, laughed good-naturedly. "None taken, kid. I know my limitations." Isaac caught Beatrice's eye across the room and gave her a small nod of approval. She returned it with the faintest smile before disappearing back into the kitchen. The work at the Bar K was hard but satisfying. Isaac spent his days riding fence lines, moving cattle, breaking horses, and doing the 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running. The other hands were good men for the most part, and he fell into the rhythm of ranch life with the ease of someone who had been doing it all his life. But it was the meals that became the brightest spots in his days. 3 times a day he would file into the dining room with the other men and watch Beatrice work. She was endlessly competent, producing hearty stews and roasts, fresh bread and pies, all from the most basic ingredients. The men adored her, not just for her cooking but for the quiet dignity she brought to the ranch. She never complained, never shirked her work, and treated everyone with the same patient courtesy. Isaac found himself looking for excuses to linger after meals, offering to help carry dishes back to the kitchen or fetch water from the pump. Beatrice seemed to welcome his company, and slowly they began to talk again the way they had on the trail. She told him about learning to make her mother's special apple pie, and he told her about teaching his sisters to ride when they were small. They spoke of books they had read and places they had seen, dreams they had harbored and losses they had endured. "You miss Texas?" Beatrice asked one evening as Isaac helped her wash the dinner dishes. "Parts of it," Isaac admitted. "I miss the land, the way everything looked in the spring when the wildflowers bloomed. But the ranch was too full of ghosts. Everywhere I looked I saw my father, remembered things we did together. It was like living in the past instead of the present." "I understand that," Beatrice said softly. "Sometimes I am glad the sodhouse collapsed. It was full of memories of Thomas, of all the plans we made that never came to anything. Maybe it is easier to start fresh somewhere new." "Maybe," Isaac agreed. "Though I think we carry our ghosts with us wherever we go. We just learn to live with them better." 2 weeks after they arrived at the Bar K, Samuel Porter and his wife returned from Kansas City. Porter was a big man with a booming laugh and shrewd eyes, and his wife Catherine was a plump, motherly woman who took an immediate liking to Beatrice. "Dutch tells me you have been doing a fine job with the cooking," Catherine said, sitting down in the kitchen for coffee one afternoon. "The men have not stopped praising you since we got back." "I am glad they are satisfied," Beatrice said. "It is good work, and I am grateful for the opportunity. Dutch also mentioned that Isaac Kellerman brought you here, that you had been trying to survive alone out on the prairie." Catherine's eyes were kind but searching. "That must have been terribly hard." "It was," Beatrice admitted. "But I survived, and now I have a chance to build something better. That is more than many people get." Catherine reached across the table and patted Beatrice's hand. "You are a strong young woman. If you ever need anything, or if any of the men give you trouble, you come straight to me. Samuel runs a good outfit, but cowboys can be rough sometimes." They have all been perfect gentlemen, Beatrice assured her. As the weeks turned into months, life at the barquet settled into a comfortable pattern. Summer gave way to fall, and the brutal heat eased into cooler days and crisp nights. The ranch was busy with preparations for winter, cattle being moved to lower pastures, repairs being made to buildings and fences, supplies being laid in. Isaac found himself spending more and more time with Beatrice whenever he could find an excuse. He would volunteer for the weekly supply runs to Oklahoma City, driving the wagon while Beatrice sat beside him and made her shopping lists. They would navigate the crowded streets together, haggling with merchants over the price of flour and sugar, coffee and salt. Sometimes, if they finished early, they would stop at a small restaurant for lunch, a luxury neither of them could often afford, but which felt like a grand adventure nonetheless. "This is nice," Beatrice said one afternoon as they ate fried chicken and mashed potatoes in a little place on Main Street. "It feels almost like being a normal person instead of just a worker." "You are a normal person," Isaac said. "One of the best people I know, in fact." Beatrice's cheeks colored slightly. "You are just saying that because I feed you." "I am saying it because it is true," Isaac insisted. "You have been through hell, Beatrice, and you came out the other side with your spirit intact. That takes a kind of strength most people do not have." "You have that strength too," Beatrice said quietly. "You gave up your family's ranch, everything you knew, to start over. That could not have been easy." "It was the hardest thing I have ever done," Isaac admitted, "but meeting you made it seem worthwhile somehow. Like maybe I was meant to come north, meant to be riding past that particular spot on that particular day." Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. Isaac wanted to reach for her hand, wanted to say all the things that had been building in his heart over the past months, but he held back. It was too soon. She was still mourning her husband, still finding her footing in this new life. He would not rush her. But as they drove back to the ranch that afternoon, Beatrice moved a little closer to him on the wagon seat, and when the wheel hit a rut and she grabbed his arm for balance, she did not immediately let go. October brought the first frost, and with it a celebration. Samuel Porter believed in treating his crew well, and every fall he threw a big party for the hands and their families, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Catherine recruited Beatrice to help with the cooking, and the two women spent 3 days preparing roasts and hams, pies and cakes, enough to satisfy 20 hungry cowboys, and then some. The party was held in the barn, which had been cleaned out and decorated with lanterns and bunting. A few of the hands played fiddle and guitar, providing lively music for dancing. Isaac, who had not danced in years, found himself standing awkwardly on the sidelines watching the others whirl and stomp. "You are not dancing," Beatrice said, appearing at his elbow with 2 cups of punch. "Never was much good at it," Isaac admitted. "My sisters tried to teach me when I was younger, but I have 2 left feet." "I do not believe that for a minute," Beatrice said. She set down the cups and held out her hand. "Dance with me." Isaac felt panic flutter in his chest. "Beatrice, I will just embarrass us both." "Nonsense. Come on, Isaac, one dance for me." He could not refuse her. He took her hand and she led him onto the makeshift dance floor. The fiddler started up a waltz, something slow and sweet, and Isaac placed his hand carefully on Beatrice's waist. She fit perfectly against him, her head coming just to his shoulder. "See," she murmured as they began to move. "You are doing fine." Isaac had expected to feel clumsy and awkward, but instead he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. They moved together easily, naturally, as though they had been dancing together for years. He was hyper-aware of every point where their bodies touched, the warmth of her hand in his, the soft fabric of her dress under his palm. "Beatrice," he began, his voice rough with emotion. She looked up at him, and in her gray eyes he saw his own feelings reflected back. "I know," she said softly. "I feel it too." "It has not even been a year since your husband passed," Isaac said. "I do not want to be disrespectful to his memory or to rush you into anything you are not ready for." "Thomas is gone," Beatrice said, and though there was sadness in her voice, there was acceptance too. "I will always care for him, always remember him, but I am still alive, Isaac, and I am tired of just surviving. I want to live again. I want to feel again." "What are you saying?" Isaac asked, hardly daring to hope. "I am saying that I care for you," Beatrice said, her voice steady despite the tears shining in her eyes. "I have cared for you since you found me out there between those cactuses and showed me kindness when you had no reason to. I am saying that when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is seeing you at breakfast. That when you are out on the range, I worry about you. That when you smile at me across the dining room, my whole day gets brighter." Isaac's heart felt like it might burst. "Beatrice Anderson, I have been half in love with you since the day I met you. I did not say anything because I thought it was too soon, thought you needed more time. But if you are telling me you feel the same way, then I will shout it from the rooftops. I love you. I want to build a life with you if you will have me." The music swirled around them, and the other dancers faded into the background. Beatrice reached up and touched Isaac's face, her work-roughened fingers gentle against his jaw. "I will have you," she whispered. "I will have you for as long as you will stay." Isaac bent his head and kissed her, right there in the middle of the barn with half the ranch watching. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, the entire room erupted in cheers and applause. "About damn time," Dutch called out, grinning widely. "We have been waiting for you two to figure it out for months." Isaac laughed, embarrassed but happy, and Beatrice buried her face against his chest. "I think we just made a spectacle of ourselves," she said, her voice muffled. "I do not care one bit," Isaac replied, tightening his arms around her. "Let them all know. I want everyone to know you are mine and I am yours." They courted properly after that, despite having already declared their feelings. Isaac would walk Beatrice to church on Sundays, and they would sit together during the service. He would help her with the heavy work around the kitchen, chopping wood for the stove and hauling water. On her Sunday afternoons off, they would take long walks around the ranch, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms and habits. "What do you want, Isaac?" Beatrice asked one crisp November afternoon as they walked beside the creek that ran through the ranch property. "Not just right now, but in the future. What are your dreams?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I want what my father had, I suppose. A place of my own, land I can work and build on. A family, roots." He glanced at her. "What about you? What do you want?" "I want to never be helpless again," Beatrice said fiercely. "When Thomas died and I had nothing, no one to turn to, it was the most frightening thing I have ever experienced. I want security, a real home. And I want love, Isaac. Not the desperate, scrambling love Thomas and I had, always worried about the next crop or the next disaster. I want the kind of love that is built on solid ground, that can weather storms because it is strong enough to bend without breaking." "I can give you that," Isaac said. "It might take time to get the land and the house, but I am saving my wages. In a few years we could have enough to buy a small ranch, start building something of our own." Beatrice repeated, a smile playing at her lips. "I like the sound of that." Winter came to Oklahoma with surprising gentleness that year. There was snow, but not the brutal blizzards that sometimes swept down from the north. The ranch work slowed somewhat, with most of the cattle brought in close to the barns and the hands spending more time on maintenance and repairs than on riding the range. Isaac and Beatrice continued their courtship through the cold months, and by the time spring arrived, everyone on the ranch knew they were planning to marry. Samuel Porter had given his blessing, Catherine had cried happy tears and started planning a party, and the other hands had taken to teasing Isaac mercilessly about becoming a married man. They set the wedding for late April, when the wildflowers would be blooming and the weather would be warm enough for an outdoor celebration. Beatrice sewed herself a new dress, pale blue with white lace at the collar and cuffs, and Catherine gave her a string of pearls that had belonged to her own mother. Isaac bought a new suit in Oklahoma City, spending more money than he had ever spent on clothing in his life, and got his hair cut properly for the first time in months. The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon in the yard of the ranch house, with the local preacher presiding and what seemed like half of Oklahoma City in attendance. Beatrice walked toward Isaac on Dutch Morrison's arm, since she had no father or brother to give her away, and Isaac felt his throat tighten with emotion at the sight of her. She was beautiful, radiant with happiness, and when she reached him and took his hands, he knew with absolute certainty that this was right. This was what he had been looking for all along, even when he had not known he was searching. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, and Isaac barely heard the words. He was too focused on Beatrice, on the way her hands trembled slightly in his, on the tears of joy that sparkled in her gray eyes. "Do you, Isaac James Kellerman, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Isaac said, his voice strong and sure. "And do you, Beatrice Marie Anderson, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Beatrice whispered. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Isaac, you may kiss your bride." Isaac cupped Beatrice's face in his hands and kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and hope and joy into that single moment. Around them, the crowd erupted in cheers, but he barely noticed. All that mattered was the woman in his arms, his wife, his partner, his future. The celebration that followed was boisterous and warm, with music and dancing and enough food to feed everyone twice over. Isaac and Beatrice moved through the party in a happy daze, accepting congratulations and well wishes, laughing at the jokes and toasts, stealing moments alone whenever they could. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Catherine Porter drew them aside. "Samuel and I have a wedding gift for you," she said, her eyes twinkling. "There is a small cabin on the far edge of the ranch property. It is not much, just 2 rooms and a porch, but it has been sitting empty for years. We thought you two might like to fix it up and make it your own, have a place that is just yours instead of living in the bunkhouse and the big house." Isaac felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Mrs. Porter, that is too generous." "Nonsense," Catherine said briskly. "You are both valuable members of this ranch, and we want you to be happy here. The cabin is yours for as long as you want it, and who knows, maybe someday you will be ready to buy your own place, but until then you will have a home." Beatrice hugged Catherine tightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." They moved into the cabin the following week. It needed work, as Catherine had warned, but the structure was sound and the location was beautiful, nestled in a grove of cottonwood trees with a view of the prairie stretching endlessly to the horizon. Isaac spent his evenings after work repairing the roof and chinking the gaps between the logs, while Beatrice scrubbed floors and whitewashed walls and sewed curtains for the windows. It took a month of steady work, but finally, the cabin was transformed into a real home. They had a bed with a real mattress, a table and chairs Isaac built himself, a cook stove, shelves for their few books, and even a rocking chair that Catherine donated from her own house. It was simple and modest, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. "Can you believe this?" Beatrice said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. She was curled against Isaac's side, his arm around her shoulders. "A year ago I was alone and desperate, hanging meat between cactuses because I had no other choice. Now I have a home, a husband, a future. It feels like a dream." "If it is a dream, I never want to wake up," Isaac said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice Kellerman." "And you saved my life, Isaac Kellerman," Beatrice replied, "in more ways than one." Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Isaac continued working as a hand on the ranch, but now he came home each evening to a wife and a warm meal, to conversation and laughter and the comfort of shared intimacy. Beatrice continued cooking for the ranch crew during the day, but in the evenings and on Sundays, she focused on their own little home, planting a garden, raising chickens, building the life they had both dreamed of. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. There were difficult days when the work was hard and the weather was harsh, when money was tight and worries ran high. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. When Isaac was thrown from a horse and cracked 2 ribs, Beatrice nursed him back to health with patient determination. When Beatrice came down with influenza in the winter, Isaac sat by her bedside for 3 days, cooling her fever and spooning broth into her mouth, refusing to leave until she was well again. They learned each other's quirks and habits, the small things that make a marriage work. Isaac learned that Beatrice hated getting up in the morning but was cheerful once she had coffee. Beatrice learned that Isaac was terrible at remembering where he put things, but had a gift for calming frightened animals. They learned to talk through their disagreements instead of letting resentment fester, to laugh at themselves when they made mistakes, to always kiss each other goodnight no matter how tired they were. By the time their first anniversary rolled around, they had saved nearly $200 toward their dream of buying their own land. It was not enough yet, but it was a start, and they were both determined to keep building on it. "Maybe in 3 or 4 more years," Isaac said one evening as they counted their savings. "If we are careful and nothing goes wrong, we could have enough for a down payment on a small ranch. Not as big as the Bar K, but enough to run a few dozen head of cattle, maybe some horses." "I want chickens," Beatrice said. "Lots of chickens, and a big garden big enough that we can preserve food for the winter and maybe sell some of the excess in town." "You can have all the chickens you want," Isaac promised, pulling her into his lap, "and the biggest garden in Oklahoma Territory." "I want children too," Beatrice added softly. "Not right away maybe, but someday. I want to fill our house with noise and laughter, give our kids the kind of life we did not have." Isaac rested his hand on her stomach, hope and longing swelling in his chest. "How many children?" 3 or 4, Beatrice said. "Enough that they are not lonely, but not so many that we cannot provide for them properly." "I like that plan," Isaac said. "I like it very much." 3 months later, Beatrice realized she was carrying their first child. She told Isaac one evening after dinner, her hands twisting nervously in her apron. "I think I am with child," she said. "I am almost certain, actually." Isaac's face went through a rapid series of emotions: surprise, joy, fear, and finally pure elation. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby. Next spring, I think," Beatrice said, and then she was crying and laughing at the same time as Isaac picked her up and spun her around. "We are going to be parents," he said, setting her down carefully as though she might break. Good Lord, Beatrice, we are going to be parents. The pregnancy was not easy. Beatrice suffered from terrible morning sickness in the first months, so severe that Catherine insisted she take a break from cooking for the crew and rest. Isaac hovered over her anxiously, bringing her dry toast and ginger tea, rubbing her back when the nausea became overwhelming. As the months progressed and her belly swelled, Beatrice struggled with exhaustion and swollen ankles, but she never complained. "It will be worth it," she would say, cradling her stomach. "When we hold our baby, all of this will seem like nothing." Isaac hoped she was right. He was terrified of something going wrong, of losing Beatrice or the baby or both. He had seen too many women die in childbirth, too many babies born too soon or too weak to survive. But he kept his fears to himself, not wanting to burden Beatrice with his worries. In late March, as the prairie began to green and the first wildflowers pushed up through the winter brown grass, Beatrice went into labor. It happened in the middle of the night, and Isaac woke to find her gripping his arm, her face pale and tight with pain. "It is time," she said. "Go get Catherine." Isaac had never moved so fast in his life. He ran through the darkness to the main house, pounding on the door until Samuel opened it, bleary-eyed and confused. "It is Beatrice," Isaac gasped. "The baby is coming." Catherine appeared behind her husband, already tying her dressing gown. "I will get my things." "Samuel, ride into town and fetch the doctor. Isaac, go back to your wife. Boil water and gather all the clean linens you have." The next 12 hours were the longest of Isaac's life. He did everything Catherine told him to do, fetching and carrying, holding Beatrice's hand when the contractions came, wiping the sweat from her face. The doctor arrived from Oklahoma City around noon, a gruff older man who examined Beatrice and pronounced that everything was progressing normally. "First babies take time," he said. "Could be hours yet. Just keep her comfortable and let nature take its course." But as the afternoon wore on, Isaac could see that Beatrice was tiring. The contractions were coming hard and fast now, and between them she lay exhausted, barely able to lift her head. Catherine and the doctor exchanged worried glances, and Isaac felt his fear spike. "Is she going to be all right?" he asked the doctor, pulling him aside. "I cannot make promises," the doctor said honestly. "Childbirth is always dangerous, but she is young and strong, and so far everything is going as it should. Keep praying, son." Isaac prayed harder than he had ever prayed in his life. He prayed for Beatrice, for their baby, for a safe delivery and a healthy outcome. He bargained with God, promising anything, everything, if only his wife would survive. As the sun began to set, Beatrice gave a final, agonized cry, and suddenly a baby's wail filled the cabin. Isaac's head snapped up, his heart pounding. "It is a boy," Catherine announced, laughing through her tears. "A healthy baby boy." The doctor was working on Beatrice, making sure the afterbirth came away cleanly, checking for bleeding. "She did well," he said after a few minutes. "Very well. She will be sore for a while, but I think she will recover just fine." Catherine brought the baby to Isaac, a tiny red-faced creature wrapped in a blanket. "Meet your son," she said softly. Isaac took the baby with shaking hands, staring down at the impossibly small person in his arms. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at him with dark, unfocused eyes, one tiny fist pressed against his mouth. Isaac felt something crack open in his chest, a rush of love so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. "Hello there, little one," he whispered. "I am your papa." "Let me see him," Beatrice said weakly from the bed, and Isaac carried the baby to her. She looked exhausted, her hair matted with sweat and dark circles under her eyes, but when she saw the baby her whole face lit up. "He is perfect," she breathed, touching the baby's cheek with one finger. Absolutely perfect. What should we name him? Isaac asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but now that the baby was actually here, those conversations seemed abstract. Beatrice studied their son's face for a long moment. James, she said finally. James Kellerman, after your father. Are you sure? Isaac asked, touched beyond words. We talked about calling a boy Robert after your brother. I am sure, Beatrice said. Your father built something good, and I want our son to carry that legacy forward. James is the right name. So James he became. Little Jamie, as they called him, turned out to have healthy lungs and an appetite to match. Beatrice recovered from the birth more quickly than Isaac had dared hope, and within 2 weeks she was up and moving around, though Catherine sternly forbade her from returning to work for at least a month. Isaac found himself completely besotted with his son. He would spend hours just watching Jamie sleep, marveling at the tiny perfection of his fingers and toes, the way his little mouth worked in his sleep as though he were nursing. He would walk the floor with Jamie at night when the baby was fussy, singing off key lullabies his own mother had sung to him. You are a natural father, Beatrice said one evening, watching Isaac rock Jamie in his arms. I knew you would be. I am terrified, Isaac admitted. What if I do something wrong? What if I cannot provide for him properly or keep him safe? Then we will figure it out together, Beatrice said, coming to stand beside him. The same way we have figured out everything else. You are not alone in this, Isaac. We are a family now. The word settled over Isaac like a benediction. Family. It was what he had wanted more than anything, what he had thought he might never have after selling his father's ranch. But here it was, real and solid and miraculous, this woman and this child who depended on him and loved him. As Jamie grew from a tiny newborn into a robust baby, life on the ranch continued. Isaac returned to his work, though he made sure to spend as much time as possible with his wife and son. Beatrice eventually went back to cooking for the crew, bringing Jamie with her and setting up a little cradle in the kitchen where he could sleep or play while she worked. The other hands doted on Jamie shamelessly. These rough cowboys who spent their days breaking horses and wrestling cattle would come into the dining room and coo over the baby, making silly faces to get him to smile. Dutch Morrison, the hardest man on the ranch, could often be found holding Jamie and telling him stories about cattle drives and wild mustangs. And if anyone teased him about going soft, he would just shrug and say that every man needed practice for when he had his own grandchildren. By Jamie's first birthday, Isaac and Beatrice had saved nearly $500. It was still not quite enough for a ranch of their own, but it was getting close. They began looking at properties for sale around Oklahoma City, riding out on Sundays to inspect parcels of land and imagine what they could do with them. This one has a good creek running through it, Isaac said one afternoon, as they stood on a rise looking over 160 acres of grassland. Jamie was strapped to his chest in a carrier Beatrice had sewn, gurgling happily and grabbing at Isaac's collar. And it is close enough to Oklahoma City that we could sell eggs and vegetables at the market, Beatrice added. But is it enough land for cattle? For a start, Isaac said. We could run maybe 30 head comfortably, and there is room to expand if we can lease some of the adjacent property. It is not the Bar K, but it is ours. Or it could be, if we can swing the down payment. They went back to the ranch and did careful calculations. With their savings and a loan from the bank in Oklahoma City, they could just manage it. Samuel Porter, when they told him their plans, was disappointed to lose 2 good workers but understanding. You have earned this, he said, shaking Isaac's hand, and you will always have friends here if you need help. The process of buying the land and getting the necessary financing took 3 months. Months filled with paperwork and negotiations and sleepless nights, worrying about whether they were making the right decision. But finally, in August of 1886, Isaac and Beatrice signed the papers that made them the owners of the Lucky K Ranch, named for Isaac's initial, and the fact that they felt lucky every single day. The property came with a small house, much bigger than their cabin but in need of substantial repairs. They threw themselves into the work with the enthusiasm of people building their dream. Isaac fixed the roof and replaced rotten floorboards while Beatrice painted walls and planted a garden. They bought a dozen laying hens and started a flock, purchased 3 cows for milking, and acquired 6 head of cattle as the foundation of their future herd. It was back-breaking work, and there were days when they both wondered if they had bitten off more than they could chew. But they had each other, and they had Jamie, who was learning to walk and getting into everything, and they had a purpose that sustained them through the hard times. By the end of their first year on the Lucky K, they were turning a small profit. The chickens produced more eggs than they could use, and Beatrice sold the excess in Oklahoma City along with vegetables from her garden. Isaac sold 2 steers at market for good prices and used the money to buy more cattle. They were not rich, not by any measure, but they were making it work. Jamie celebrated his 2nd birthday with a small party, just the 3 of them and a few friends from the Bar K who rode over for the occasion. He was a sturdy, cheerful child with his mother's gray eyes and his father's dark hair, full of energy and curiosity. Isaac watched him toddle around the yard, chasing chickens and laughing with pure joy, and felt his heart swell. "He is going to be a handful," Beatrice said, slipping her hand into Isaac's. Just like his mother, Isaac teased, and yelped when Beatrice elbowed him in the ribs. "I have been thinking," Beatrice said more seriously, "about having another baby. Jamie is getting bigger, and I do not want him to be an only child, but only if you think we can manage it financially." Isaac considered. Money was still tight, and another child would mean additional expenses. But he thought about his own childhood, about the bond he had shared with his sisters, and he knew he wanted that for Jamie. "I think we can manage," he said. "It might be tight for a while, but we will make it work. We always do." Their 2nd child, a daughter they named Eliza Grace, was born in the spring of 1888. The birth was easier than Jamie's had been, and Beatrice recovered quickly. Eliza was a quieter baby than her brother had been, with Isaac's dark eyes and Beatrice's delicate features. Jamie was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything, though his help often caused more work than it saved. The ranch continued to grow. Isaac expanded the herd to 40 head of cattle and bought a young stallion with good bloodlines, planning to start breeding horses as well. Beatrice's garden flourished, and she began preserving food in earnest, filling their cellar with jars of vegetables, fruits, and pickles. They built a larger chicken coop and added a pig pen, slowly but steadily building the diverse operation they had dreamed of. There were setbacks, of course. A hard winter in 1889 killed 3 of their cattle, and a summer drought the following year withered half the garden. But they weathered each challenge together, adapting and persevering. Isaac took on occasional work at neighboring ranches when money was especially tight, and Beatrice sold her baked goods at the church bazaar to bring in extra income. As the children grew, the house filled with noise and laughter. Jamie was rough and tumble, always getting into scrapes and coming home with torn trousers and skinned knees. Eliza was more thoughtful, happiest when she was helping her mother in the kitchen or tending the chickens. They fought like cats and dogs some days, but they were fiercely protective of each other, and Isaac loved watching them grow. By 1891, 8 years after Isaac had first found Beatrice hanging meat between cactuses, the Lucky K Ranch was thriving. They had paid off half their loan, expanded to 80 head of cattle, and established a reputation for producing high-quality horses. Beatrice's eggs and produce were in constant demand in Oklahoma City, and they had even hired a young man to help with the heavy work around the ranch. Isaac stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over his land, and felt a profound sense of contentment. Beatrice came out to join him, slipping under his arm, and they stood together in comfortable silence. "You ever think about that day?" Beatrice asked softly. "When you found me out there alone, all the time," Isaac admitted. "I think about how easily I could have ridden past, how I almost did. I was tired and hot and just wanted to get to the bar, Kay, but something made me stop." "I think it was fate," Beatrice said. "Or God, or whatever you want to call it. We were meant to find each other, Isaac, meant to build this life together." "I believe that too," Isaac said. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, you know. I was lost when I came to Oklahoma, grieving for everything I had given up. But you gave me a reason to keep going, a future worth fighting for." "We saved each other," Beatrice corrected gently, "and we built something beautiful together." Behind them, they could hear Jamie and Eliza laughing as they played some game in their shared bedroom. The chickens were settling down for the night in their coop. The cattle were grazing peacefully in the near pasture, and smoke rose from the chimney of the house they had made into a home. Isaac pulled Beatrice close and kissed her, slow and deep, pouring all his love and gratitude into that single gesture. When they finally pulled apart, she was smiling up at him with those storm-gray eyes that had captured his heart 8 years ago. "I love you, Beatrice Kellerman," he said. "More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you, Isaac Kellerman," she replied. "My cowboy, my hero, my home." They stood together on the porch as the stars began to appear overhead, the vast Oklahoma sky stretching endlessly above them. The wind carried the scent of grass and earth, of growing things and new beginnings. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and their horses whinnied softly in response. It was not the life Isaac had imagined when he sold his father's ranch in Texas, and it certainly was not the life Beatrice had dreamed of when she married Thomas Anderson all those years ago. But it was their life, built from hardship and determination, from love and faith and the willingness to take a chance on each other. The following years brought more growth and change. Oklahoma Territory became increasingly settled, with more families arriving every year seeking their own piece of the American dream. Oklahoma City grew from a rough frontier town into a proper city with paved streets and electric lights. The world was changing rapidly, rushing toward a new century full of promise and possibility. In 1893, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. She was 33 now, and this pregnancy was harder on her than the previous 2 had been. But in the spring of 1894, she gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas Anderson Kellerman in honor of her first husband. Isaac had suggested the name, wanting to acknowledge that Thomas had been part of Beatrice's journey, part of what had made her into the woman Isaac loved. Young Thomas, called Tommy to distinguish him from his namesake, was a sweet-natured child who seemed to inherit the best qualities of both his parents. He had his father's calm steadiness and his mother's warm heart, and he adored his older siblings. Jamie was 10 now, already helping with the ranch work in earnest. He could rope and ride nearly as well as Isaac, and he had a gift for working with horses that suggested he had inherited his father's talent. Eliza was 6, a bright child who loved books and learning. Beatrice taught her to read using the Bible and whatever other books they could afford, and Isaac built her a small desk in the corner of the kitchen where she could practice her letters. The ranch continued to prosper. Isaac had become known throughout the territory as a man who could break horses without breaking their spirit, and ranchers came from miles around to buy his stock. Beatrice had expanded her enterprise to include selling butter and cheese as well as eggs and produce, and she had hired 2 local women to help with the work. They were not rich, not by the standards of the railroad barons and cattle kings who were reshaping the West, but they were comfortable. They had a good house, healthy children, a successful ranch, and each other. It was more than either of them had ever dared to dream. In 1896, when Jamie was 12 and already tall enough to look his father in the eye, he asked if he could start working with Isaac full-time instead of going to school. It was a common request in ranching families, where children were needed for labor, but Isaac and Beatrice had agreed long ago that education was important. "You need to finish school," Isaac said firmly. "Learning to read and write and do figures, that is important. The world is changing, son, and you need to be able to keep up with it." "But I want to be a rancher like you," Jamie protested. "I do not need book learning for that. Your father is a rancher because he can read contracts and do accounts," Beatrice interjected. "If he could not do those things, someone would have cheated us out of this ranch long ago. You will finish school, James Kellerman, and that is final." Jamie grumbled but obeyed, and years later he would admit that his parents had been right. The education he received, basic though it was by modern standards, served him well throughout his life. As the century drew to a close, Isaac and Beatrice found themselves becoming pillars of their community. They were known as fair and honest people, always willing to help a neighbor in need. When a young couple lost their barn to a fire, Isaac organized the neighbors to help rebuild it. When a widow struggled to feed her children, Beatrice made sure baskets of food appeared on her porch. They tithed faithfully to the church and supported the local school, and they raised their children to understand that with prosperity came responsibility. In 1899, as the nation prepared to enter a new century, Isaac and Beatrice celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a surprise party, with help from friends and neighbors, filling the house with people and laughter and music. There were toasts and speeches, dancing and feasting, and as the evening wore on, Isaac found himself standing outside with Dutch Morrison, who had retired from the Bar K and bought a small place of his own nearby. "You have built something good here, Isaac," Dutch said, surveying the ranch with an appraising eye. "Better than good. You have built something that will last." "We built it together, Beatrice and I," Isaac corrected. "I could not have done any of this without her." "That is the secret, is it not?" Dutch mused. "Finding the right partner, someone who makes you better, stronger. You two have that." Isaac thought about the woman inside, his wife of 15 years, the mother of his children, his best friend and truest companion. He thought about the scared, determined woman he had found hanging meat between cactuses, and how she had grown into this remarkable person who ran their ranch with the confidence of someone who had earned every bit of her success. "We do," he agreed. "We surely do." The turn of the century brought both celebration and change. Oklahoma Territory was pushing toward statehood, and there was talk that it might happen within the next few years. The railroad had reached Oklahoma City, connecting the territory to the wider world, and with it came new opportunities and challenges. Jamie, now 16, was seriously courting a neighbor girl named Sarah Miller. Eliza, 12 and on the cusp of young womanhood, had announced her intention to become a teacher. Tommy, at 6, was still young enough to be more interested in catching frogs than in his future, but he was showing signs of having his father's way with animals. Isaac was 43 now, with silver threading through his dark hair and permanent lines etched around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Beatrice was 40, still beautiful despite the toll that hard work and childbearing had taken on her body. They moved a little slower than they once had, and the work seemed a little harder some days, but they were healthy and strong and grateful for every day they had together. One evening in the summer of 1902, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Beatrice leaned her head on Isaac's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "We did it," she said softly. "We built the life we dreamed of." "We did," Isaac agreed. "Though I have to admit, the reality is even better than the dream." "You think the children will stay?" Beatrice asked. "Jamie will probably take over the ranch eventually, but what about Eliza and Tommy?" "Eliza will do whatever she sets her mind to," Isaac said with a father's pride. "If she wants to teach, she will be a fine teacher. And Tommy, well, he is still young. Who knows what he will want to do, but wherever they go, whatever they become, they will know they came from something solid. They will know they came from love." "That is all we can give them, really," Beatrice said. "Love and a good foundation. The rest is up to them." In 1905, Jamie married Sarah Miller in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Oklahoma City. The young couple built a house on the far edge of the Lucky K property, and Jamie officially became Isaac's partner in running the ranch. Eliza finished school and began teaching at the one-room schoolhouse 3 miles down the road. Tommy, now 11, was developing into a fine horseman and already talking about breeding championship quarter horses someday. Isaac and Beatrice, now in their late 40s, found themselves transitioning into a new phase of life. They were still active and involved in the ranch, but they were also able to step back somewhat, letting the next generation take over more of the heavy work. They had more time to spend together, to take long walks and sit on the porch in the evenings, to simply enjoy the fruits of their labor. In the spring of 1906, Sarah gave birth to a daughter, making Isaac and Beatrice grandparents for the first time. They named her Mary Beatrice, and when Isaac held his granddaughter for the first time, he was transported back to that moment 20 years earlier when he had first held Jamie. The circle of life, turning eternally forward. "We are old now," Beatrice said, watching Isaac rock the baby. "Speak for yourself," Isaac retorted, but he was smiling. "I prefer to think of us as seasoned." "I prefer to think of us as blessed," Beatrice said seriously. "Look at everything we have, Isaac. Our children, our grandchildren, this ranch, this life. 23 years ago I was hanging meat between cactuses, certain I was going to die alone and forgotten, and now look at us." Isaac reached out and took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "Best day of my life, finding you out there. Second best was marrying you. Everything good that has happened since flows from those 2 moments." "And you say you are not romantic," Beatrice teased, but her eyes were shining with tears. Oklahoma achieved statehood in 1907, and the celebration in Oklahoma City was legendary. The entire Kellerman family attended, 3 generations of them now, watching the ceremonies and feeling pride in their adopted home. Oklahoma was no longer a wild frontier but a proper state, part of the Union, with all the rights and responsibilities that came with it. As the years rolled on, the Lucky K continued to thrive. Jamie and Sarah had 3 more children, filling the ranch with the sound of young voices. Eliza eventually married a lawyer from Oklahoma City, a good man named Daniel White, who appreciated his wife's intelligence and independence. They had 2 daughters and lived in a fine house in town, but Eliza remained close to her family and visited the ranch often. Tommy, true to his childhood dreams, became renowned throughout Oklahoma for his ability to breed and train champion quarter horses. He traveled to competitions all over the state and even went to Texas and Kansas, bringing home ribbons and trophies and building a reputation that brought customers from far and wide. Isaac and Beatrice settled into the comfortable rhythms of grandparenthood and semi-retirement. They still helped with the ranch work when they were needed, but mostly they tended Beatrice's enormous garden, looked after the chickens, and spent time with their grandchildren. They were fixtures at church and community events, respected elders whose advice was sought on everything from farming techniques to family disputes. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1914, their children threw them an enormous party at the ranch. It seemed like half of Oklahoma showed up, a testament to the impact Isaac and Beatrice had made on their community over 3 decades. There was music and dancing, speeches and toasts, and as the sun set and lanterns were lit to continue the celebration into the night, Isaac pulled Beatrice aside for a private moment. They walked to the rise behind the main house, where they could look out over the entire ranch spread below them. The house glowed with light and life, surrounded by barns and corrals and pastures dotted with cattle and horses. Beyond that, they could see the smaller houses where Jamie and Tommy lived with their families, lights glowing in those windows too. 30 years, Isaac said wonderingly. Somehow it seems both longer and shorter than that. I know exactly what you mean, Beatrice replied. She was 64 now, her hair completely gray and her face lined with age, but to Isaac she was as beautiful as the day he married her. Sometimes I feel like that young woman hanging meat between cactuses was someone else entirely, and sometimes I feel like it was yesterday. Do you have any regrets? Isaac asked. Anything you wish we had done differently? Beatrice was quiet for a long moment, considering. I regret that Thomas died young and never got to see what his dreams of the West could have become. But I do not regret anything that happened after. Every choice we made, every hardship we endured, every joy we celebrated, it all led us to this moment. And this moment is perfect. Isaac wrapped his arms around his wife, holding her close and breathing in the familiar scent of her. I love you, Beatrice Kellerman. I have loved you for 31 years, since the day I found you out there alone. I will love you for however many years God grants us. And I love you, Isaac Kellerman, Beatrice replied, her voice thick with emotion. You saved me, and then you loved me, and then you built a life with me. You are the best man I have ever known. They stood together on that rise as the party continued below. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The Oklahoma wind blew soft and warm around them, carrying the scent of grass and cattle, of growing things and life continuing forward. The world around them continued to change. The automobile became increasingly common, making travel faster and easier. Electric lights appeared in more homes, and telephones connected people across vast distances. The old ways of the West were fading into memory and legend, replaced by a more modern world. But on the Lucky K Ranch, some things remained constant. The land still needed tending, the cattle still needed herding, the horses still needed training. And at the heart of it all were Isaac and Beatrice, the foundation upon which 3 generations had been built. In 1920, as they approached their 40th wedding anniversary, Isaac fell ill. It started as a persistent cough that would not go away, and despite Beatrice's nursing and the best medical care they could afford, it developed into pneumonia. For 2 weeks, Isaac fought the infection, his breathing labored and his fever high, while Beatrice sat by his bedside and refused to leave. You cannot die on me, Isaac Kellerman, she told him fiercely, wiping his fevered brow. We have an agreement, remember. We grow old together. We watch our grandchildren have children of their own. You do not get to leave me yet." Isaac, in his lucid moments, would grasp her hand and promise to try his best. And somehow, whether through the power of modern medicine or the sheer force of Beatrice's will or divine intervention, he pulled through. By the time spring arrived, he was back on his feet, thinner and weaker but alive. "You gave me a terrible scare," Beatrice told him as they sat on the porch, Isaac wrapped in blankets despite the warm sunshine. "I gave myself a terrible scare," Isaac admitted. "When I was at my worst, drifting in and out, I kept thinking about all the things I still wanted to do with you. All the sunsets I still wanted to watch, all the conversations I still wanted to have. I was not ready to let go." "Good," Beatrice said firmly, "because I was not ready to let you go either." They celebrated their 40th anniversary quietly that year, just family, but it was all the sweeter for almost having been lost. Isaac was 63 now and Beatrice was 60, both of them moving slowly and feeling their age, but they were together, and that was what mattered. The ranch passed fully into Jamie's hands after Isaac's illness. Though Isaac remained involved in an advisory capacity, he no longer had the strength for the physical work of running a ranch. But he found satisfaction in watching his children and grandchildren carry on what he and Beatrice had built. Jamie was a fine rancher, steady and hardworking. Tommy's horse breeding program had become famous throughout the region. And Eliza, though she lived in town, remained deeply involved in the family and community. As the years continued their relentless march forward, Isaac and Beatrice settled into the peaceful twilight of their lives. They spent their days in the garden with their grandchildren, at church, surrounded by the community they had helped build. They were honored as pioneers, people who had come to Oklahoma territory when it was still wild and helped tame it into something prosperous and stable. On warm evenings they would still sit on the porch and watch the sun set, their hands clasped together, comfortable in the silence that comes from decades of companionship. Sometimes they would reminisce about the early days, about hanging meat between cactuses and sleeping under the stars, about building their cabin and having their first baby. Other times they would talk about the present, about their grandchildren's accomplishments and the changes in the world around them. "Do you think we did right by them?" Beatrice asked one evening. "Our children, our grandchildren. Do you think we prepared them for the world they are inheriting?" "I think we gave them what we could," Isaac said. "Love, values, a work ethic, and roots. The rest they have to figure out for themselves the same way we did." "I hope they are happy," Beatrice said softly. "I hope they find what we found." "Not everyone finds what we found," Isaac said. "What we have is rare, Beatrice. Special. But I think we showed them what is possible when two people truly commit to each other. That is a powerful lesson." In the fall of 1925, as the leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp, Beatrice suffered a stroke. It was mild, the doctor said, and with rest she should recover most of her function. But it left her weakened, one side of her face slightly drooping, her speech occasionally slurred. She was frustrated and frightened. This woman who had always been so capable and independent, now struggling with tasks that had once been simple. Isaac nursed her with the same patient devotion she had shown him during his illness. He helped her relearn how to write, how to walk without stumbling, how to speak clearly. He read to her from the Bible and from the books she loved, made her favorite meals even though she could only eat small amounts, sat with her for hours just holding her hand. "I am sorry," Beatrice said one afternoon, tears streaming down her face. "I am sorry you have to take care of me like this." "Hush now," Isaac said gently, wiping away her tears. "Do you remember what we promised each other, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health?" This is just the sickness part. We will get through it together, same as we have gotten through everything else." Beatrice did recover, though not completely. She was never quite as strong or as sharp as she had been before, and there were days when the frustration of her limitations made her irritable and sad. But Isaac never wavered in his care and devotion, and slowly, Beatrice accepted her new reality and adapted to it. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in the spring of 1926, a milestone so remarkable that the local newspaper came out to the ranch to interview them. The reporter, a young woman barely out of school, was fascinated by their story. "So you found Mrs. Kellerman hanging meat between cactuses?" she asked Isaac, her pencil flying across her notepad. "I did," Isaac confirmed. "She was trying to survive after her sodhouse collapsed, doing the best she could with what she had. Most courageous thing I ever saw." "And you, Mrs. Kellerman," the reporter said, turning to Beatrice. "What was it like being rescued like that?" Beatrice smiled, her words coming slowly but clearly. "It was not a rescue, it was a beginning. Isaac offered me a chance and I took it. Everything that came after we built together." That is the real story. The article that ran in the paper painted a romantic picture of their life together, calling them pioneers and exemplars of frontier courage and determination. It was a bit overblown, Isaac and Beatrice both thought, but it was also not entirely wrong. They had endured and prevailed, had built something lasting out of nothing but hope and hard work. As 1926 turned into 1927 and beyond, Isaac and Beatrice grew older and frailer. Isaac was 70 now and Beatrice was 67, ancient by frontier standards. Their children hovered over them, worried and attentive, and their grandchildren visited as often as they could, bringing their own children to meet the patriarch and matriarch of the Kellerman clan. They no longer walked the ranch, but they could still sit on the porch and watch the sun set. They no longer worked in the garden, but they could still direct others and share the wisdom of their experience. They no longer danced, but they could still hold each other close and remember when they had. One evening in late spring of 1928, as the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Isaac and Beatrice sat together on the porch they had shared for so many years. Isaac was holding Beatrice's hand, their fingers intertwined, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you remember the day we met?" Beatrice asked, her voice soft and slightly slurred but full of warmth. "Every detail," Isaac replied. "The way the sun beat down, how hot it was. The way you looked at me, all suspicion and defiance. The meat hanging between those cactuses. I thought it was the strangest thing I had ever seen." "It was strange," Beatrice agreed with a laugh, "but it was all I had. I was so determined not to give up, not to let the land beat me." "You never gave up," Isaac said. "That is one of the things I love most about you. You just keep going, no matter what life throws at you." "We kept going," Beatrice corrected. "Together. That is the secret, Isaac. We faced everything together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors deepen and shift across the vast Oklahoma sky. The sounds of the ranch drifted around them, cattle lowing, horses whinnying, the distant voices of their family going about the evening chores. "I have been thinking," Isaac said slowly, "about everything we have been through, everything we have built. And I realized that the day I found you hanging meat between those cactuses was not just the day I saved you. It was the day you saved me too. I was lost, grieving, drifting. You gave me purpose again. You gave me a reason to build instead of just exist." "We saved each other," Beatrice said, echoing the words she had spoken so many years ago. "And we built this beautiful life together. Our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, this ranch, this legacy. We did this, Isaac, together." "Together," Isaac agreed. He pulled Beatrice closer, pressing a kiss to her silver hair. "I love you, Beatrice Kellerman. I loved you the day I met you. I loved you the day I married you, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Isaac Kellerman," Beatrice replied, her voice thick with emotion. "My cowboy, my hero, my love, my life. Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for not riding past. Thank you for giving me a chance at this life." The sun finally slipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with purple and gold. Stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first night together on the trail, the same stars that had shone on every important moment of their life together. Isaac and Beatrice sat together on the porch, two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful together. They had faced hardship and loss, joy and triumph, and through it all they had held tight to each other and refused to let go. In the years that followed, they would continue to decline gently, their bodies failing but their spirits remaining strong. Isaac would pass first, in his sleep on a quiet winter night in 1930, Beatrice at his side as she had been for 46 years of marriage. Beatrice would follow him 18 months later, having lived long enough to know that everything they had built would continue without them, that their legacy was secure. But on this perfect evening in 1928, as they sat together watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, they were simply two people who loved each other deeply and completely. The cowboy who had found the woman hanging meat between cactuses, and the woman who had let him into her heart. Together they had built a life, a family, a legacy that would endure for generations. And as the Oklahoma wind blew soft and warm around them, carrying the scent of home and family and everything they had worked so hard to create, Isaac and Beatrice held each other close and counted their blessings. They had found love in the hardest of circumstances, had built happiness from nothing but determination and devotion, and had proven that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. Their story, which had begun with meat drying between two cactuses on a scorching summer day, had become a testament to the power of love, the importance of perseverance, and the beauty of two souls finding each other and choosing to build a life together. It was a story that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple act of kindness, and that true love can flourish even in the harshest of environments. As the last light faded from the sky and the ranch settled into peaceful darkness, Isaac and Beatrice Kellerman sat together on their porch, surrounded by the life they had built, and knew with absolute certainty that they had found everything they had ever been searching for. They had found home. They had found family. They had found forever. And it had all started with a cowboy finding a woman drying meat between two cactuses because she had no porch to use.